Barry, thank you so much for joining me today, man. I told you before we started recording, but I'll tell you again, my brother, you have been on a very short list of personalities I've wanted to talk to for a very long time. So thank you for your time today, sir.
It's my pleasure. It's good to be out of the cave. I've been in a cave for about a decade.
Yeah.
So it's nice. I appreciate the invitation.
So for our listeners who might not know about your story, would you mind filling us in on your backstory a little bit and your history?
Sure. First, the story of my life will be airing soon on Netflix in a 4-part docuseries. So there's a lot to to my life. And I really didn't intentionally set out to be this person. I just sort of saw opportunities and went with it. And yeah, so I was one of the US's top drug agents. And I didn't say that. My bosses said that in an interview with the AP. I arrested more people per month than the entire task force agents put together. And we had 30 agents. I was doing 30 to 40 cases per month. Now, I'm not saying that to brag, because obviously what I was doing was immoral. It was wrong. But that was before the internet. You know, I believed what the churches told me, and my parents and my peers and the schools. They all taught me drugs are bad. And I didn't have anything to compare that to. So I really thought I was doing something for humanity out there, arresting all these nonviolent drug offenders. Well, I realized that I wasn't doing the right thing when the internet came out. So I just sort of flipped, and I made a series of DVDs called Never Get Busted, Volume 1 and Volume 2, totally just expecting to sell those in High Times magazine to the stoners who kept getting arrested. In the DVDs, I explained how I was trained to bust the drug users, and I offered a way to counter that, to keep from getting busted. It went viral. I woke up with helicopters flying over my house, 400 emails, of which a dozen of them were mainstream media news wanting to interview me. So I jumped in some interviews there with Fox and MSNBC and CNN, and I enjoyed the attention. I thought, this is bringing a voice to the drug war. So to kind of keep my audience excited, I started busting cops with a little internet reality show called Cop Busters. I actually got 2 people freed from federal prison from my work, but I was naive. I really believed if I didn't break the law, I would be okay. I was running for Texas Attorney General, and I was using the success of Cop Busters to get the money and the votes I would need to win, and I was going to stop the drug war in Texas. And I'm so embarrassed now that I would even think that would be possible. I had no idea that the Matrix guards those positions. They're not going to let me be Attorney General. Come on, Barry, you're stupid. And you're not going to be able to run around the U.S. busting cops and embarrassing them without some type of retaliation, even if you are abiding by all the laws. So yeah, I got arrested 9 times. My entire life, I've been arrested 9 times, all misdemeanors. They raided me, took my kids. You can see that interview on Judge Napolitano on Fox. We talked about it. He interviewed me shortly after they took my kids. And I'll tell you, Jason, it was so bad. The retaliation was so bad. Every time I walked out of my front door, I was being arrested and guns pointed at me. Mm-hmm. And eventually I couldn't take any more of it. So I waited till I pled all my cases out. I pled everything not guilty, except I pled guilty to something, I think, not having a PI license, a private investigator's license, even though I didn't need one because I'm a journalist. But I pled guilty to that, and a $700 fine, no jail time. I didn't pay the $700 fine. I left the U.S. with my family. We took a cruise ship to Aruba. And instead of getting back on the cruise ship, I had a speedboat waiting in Aruba to take me and my family to Venezuela. Venezuela didn't have any jurisdiction. I wasn't running from a crime, but I was running with my son, with my autistic son. I promised his mother that I would never let them get split up again, like the government split us up. I said, that never happened again. Well, I knew they couldn't touch us in Venezuela. I knew the mom and the kid could stay together. It's heart-wrenching watching this autistic son screaming and crying, wanting the mother, and the government not listening to it. It was torturous. Like my wife could see him once a week, and that was bittersweet because they got to see each other, but them being torn apart, it got so bad that wife is dead now. I contribute her death to the trauma of losing her kids. So I fled to Venezuela with my family, and I boxed it out there for about 8 months. One of the most dangerous places on earth. I had a fist fight my way through that country. And I thought, this is too dangerous for my family. So we snuck through 13 Venezuelan checkpoints. We had some locals help us do it. And we arrived at the Brazilian border where they gave me political asylum, me and my family. We got political asylum. I stayed there about a year. We talked the courts and my autistic son's natural father into signing for his passport. Once we knew that happened, we couldn't be arrested for parental kidnapping anymore. We left Brazil and went to Mexico, where I lived for 6 years. While in Mexico, I went through a divorce. She was murdered. I became a drug addict, and all my family turned on me, and I met my wife that I have now. Heard I just enjoyed our 8-year anniversary.
Wow.
She was Filipino. So I wanted to come check out her environment. I loved the Philippines so much that I stayed. So I've been here in the Philippines for 5 years. Now, through that entire process that I just hurriedly laid out, I never quit freeing drug prisoners through my expert witness program. Throughout the years, people know if they catch a drug case, I'm the one who will manipulate the courts. I'll make their lawyer work right, and I get a lot of cases dismissed. So my heart and my passion and my will to continue fighting in this drug war never quit. I just had to do it from afar, bro. I had to leave, flee. And I've been gone for a total of 15 years. I haven't been back.
Yeah.
The Philippines, this documentary is going to show, this Netflix documentary. It's Tiger King producers who are doing this.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to jump into that with you because, I mean, there's so many points throughout your life story that I want to hit. So let's go back to the beginning, because you referenced what you were doing as being immoral. Can you expand on that a little bit? Like what as a narcotics officer, what about what you were doing did you feel was ethically incorrect or immoral?
Yeah, well, I'm I guess libertarian by heart. I don't claim any political group. I don't do well in groups. But I believe that something shouldn't be a crime unless there's a victim, like robbery, theft, burglary, and the drug crime, the state's the victim. It's like the state of Texas versus whoever I arrested. And I'm not quite sure how the state of Texas became a victim when he lit up a joint and smoked it. So to go as drastic as raiding somebody's house, handcuffing them, taking them to a cage and putting them through all of that for a nonviolent drug crime, to me, that's immoral.
Yeah.
It's not right. We can do better.
Yeah. And I feel like Reagan's drug war policy, disproportionately targeted poor people, and as a result of that, disproportionately targeted young Black men. And I think that
100%.
Yeah. And so as a narcotics officer in Texas, I mean, you were probably mainly arresting people for marijuana, correct?
Marijuana and a lot of crack cocaine.
Yeah.
And this was the early 90s. So methamphetamine was out there too, not the crystal. The ice had just hit. In fact, I made the first ICE arrest in West Texas. I got it from a truck driver coming through from California. But yeah, mostly marijuana, a lot of crack cocaine, and some methamphetamine. Very little opiates like we have now. Very, very little bit of heroin I would ever catch.
Yeah, and I mean, you being in Texas, it says a lot, you being the top narcotics officer in the state where, you have thousands of tons of drugs passing through every single, month or year, right? I mean, like we're talking, coming through the southern border in Texas. I mean, that's just drug city, right? I mean, that's
Of course. Yeah. Well, almost all of our drugs come from Mexico, and Texas borders Mexico. So yeah, and they're still pouring in. The drug war has not worked.
No, and that's it is, I think now, and I will credit you with this with a lot, because, like I told you before we started recording, you popped up on my radar years ago. I'm from Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. That's the city I was born and raised in. The group of guys that I grew up around, we all kind of operated within some gray areas, certain periods in our lives. And so when your DVD, Never Get Busted, made its way into Vancouver, everybody was burning it, trading it. People couldn't believe it. It's this narcotics officer. He's telling everybody how to not get busted. But essentially what you were doing was teaching people how to beat the drug war. Right. And that's what it was. It's, I for the longest time, I mean, I'm still kind of divided, because I do feel like in some ways that drugs, the drug trade and the black market leads to violent offenses. But in terms of users, I feel like, and we're in a tricky situation here in Canada, right? Like in British Columbia, they've basically decriminalized everything, and they've started a safe supply program, which basically is, a program where addicts are handed, clean drugs that aren't laced with fentanyl, because the fentanyl crisis in Vancouver is just, I mean, it's an epidemic, right? I mean, it's exploding. And but I do feel like in a way that treatment is the better option, right? Like when it comes to decriminalization, just handing people free drugs and sending them on their way, it tends to create a lot more chaos. Whereas if you have a system where treatment is readily available for people, and you invest your money there instead of into throwing people in prison, I feel like that's the more beneficial way, the way to actually clean things up.
I agree. And I'll tell you, since COVID and since the opiate crisis, and since I lived in Mexico, dude, I've had to rethink how I feel about what we should do in place of what we're doing now. I was always old school, saying prohibition never works. Prohibition does not work, until I went to Mexico. Mm-hmm. Prohibition does work. Listen to me. Prohibition works. Mm-hmm. I lived in Puerto Vallarta. Mexico is the source city for all the opiates that are poisoning the Americans. That's coming from Mexico. But you can't buy those same opiates in Puerto Vallarta. I know, because I've been through so much trauma, and I partied through it. I woke up one day and I was an addict. I had been overusing too much. So I had to go buy drugs, and I tried to buy opiates and never really liked them. I got addicted to the methamphetamine, but you can't buy heroin in places in Mexico. You can't buy fentanyl in places in Mexico, although that's where it's coming from. Why can't you buy it? The cartels prohibit it. It's the death penalty. If you get caught selling that shit in their jurisdiction, they'll knock your teeth out first time, and then the second time they will kill you. And my wife and I, a month before I left Mexico, we saw 5 people shot. Bing, 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 one at a time. One of the most horrible things I've ever seen in my life. But they wouldn't quit selling drugs. Only the cartel can sell drugs. I also know Singapore doesn't have any overdoses, because they have total prohibition. It's death penalty if you have the drugs. Now, I'm not saying I'm for the death penalty. I'm saying prohibition does work. There's no sick people in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. All those homeless people and sick people and overdoses, it's not there like it is in the U.S. I also used to believe the old school route that the government can't stop the flow of drugs, no matter how hard you try. I remember I used to use the example, prohibition doesn't work because inside the prisons, which are some of the most heavily guarded institutions in the world, you can still get drugs. So if it can get through into the prison system, then it can certainly get across the border, no matter how hard you try to stop it. But I don't believe that now. I saw the Mexican cartels effectively prohibit and keep a certain drug out of their cities. Tells me the U.S. government can do it too. I'm certain the U.S. government is allowing the fentanyl crisis as part of a depopulation program. The government can stop the fentanyl. So what am I saying? Does prohibition work? Yes. Does that mean we need to prohibit it? No, because I think it needs to be heavily regulated, kind of like what you were saying, Jason, where there's some kind of treatment. I never in my life would have thought humans would continue taking a drug that killed them. In fact, I used to say this all the time. I used to say, you know, what was I talking about, Jason?
Fentanyl.
Remind me.
The decriminalization, prohibition of drugs.
Yeah. I used to say it's not that drugs are bad, it's that they're so good. And if you start trying to sell a drug that says, hey, take this, 1 out of 5 people die from it, you wouldn't be able to sell that drug. That's what I said.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not true. I've seen through the opiate crisis, these motherfuckers know that they can die from it, and they're still taking it.
Yeah.
They're still taking it, which tells me they need some help. They need some intervention. And that intervention, in my opinion, would be to stop it at the border, stop it from coming in, just like the Mexicans do, just like Singapore does. Don't allow it to poison your culture. And the drugs you do allow, say methamphetamine, cocaine, marijuana, besides marijuana, but these other drugs, regulate it. Give them clean drugs. And if they take that drug and start becoming an addict, take their ass to rehab. Be really strict about it, like the Mexicans. The Mexicans are like, guess what, Barry? You can do all the drugs you want in our city as long as you don't do it in public, and as long as you don't sell it, and as long as you're not violent. Those were the rules. If somebody came into that city doing drugs and started punching people or robbing people, they got dealt with right then on the street.
Yeah.
That's why it was so peaceful. That's why it's so peaceful in Mexico. I loved it there. So oddly, the cartels can teach the American government something about the drug war. That sounds crazy, doesn't it?
Yeah,
but it's not.
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, when people talk about decriminalization, they often, you know, reference Holland or Portugal, but what they often miss is that both countries have poured a considerable amount of money into treatment, and that's the missing key, right? I mean, in BC, they've pretty much decriminalized everything, but they've also vastly restricted funding for treatment. And so what you have is a Night of the Living Dead situation, right? I mean,
a drug free for all.
Yeah, the Lower East Side of Vancouver is, I mean, it's the worst thing you will ever see in your life.
See, I used to think that wouldn't happen, that if you gave humans the choice and you backed out of enforcement, that wouldn't happen. But it happened. Did it surprise you too, or am I the only one that's...
I mean, it did to a degree. I growing up in my 20s, I was a hardcore liberal, right? I was very progressive. So I was always one of these people where I thought decriminalize everything, just let it go and it'll work itself out. But now that I'm a bit older and I'm seeing the result of some of these drug policies, I definitely see, I mean, I think decriminalization is the way. It doesn't make sense to throw people in prison for small time drug offenses, right? I mean, especially users, right? You're not solving a problem. And essentially all they really are is they're just bodies that generate profit for the private prison industrial complex, right? So it's that's the only purpose they really serve. But if you want to decriminalize drugs, you have to make treatment more available. And that's why Portugal and and the Netherlands have been so successful with their drug decriminalization programs because treatment is readily available. And I can tell you, I have friends who were addicts. Some are recovering now, and it took them years to get into drug treatment facilities, right? And that's the thing, is it's the availability of treatment. I always say this: addicts don't want to be addicts, and you know this because you were an addict. You don't want to be an addict. It's not like you wake up in the morning and you look forward to doing whatever you have to do to get your fix, right? Like it's addicts don't want to live that life. If you give them an opportunity, if you give them an out, most addicts will take it. They'll at least try. It doesn't mean it'll be successful, but they'll give it their best effort, right? And for a lot of addicts, it takes 3 or 4 times to pass through treatment for it to finally stick. Some it takes 10, some it's 20, right? But as long as those facilities and those programs are available, then you're actively working toward cleaning up the problem. But I think that's the issue. The issue isn't whether or not we should whether or not we should decriminalize various substances. It's what's available to people who are addicted and want to get off them.
So you're right. The blue cities, the Democrat cities in the U.S., when they backed out law enforcement and decriminalized under a gram of these hard drugs, according to what you're saying, the ingredient they missed is they didn't give treatment.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it.
And it's horrible. I know what you're talking about. I watch it on YouTube. I haven't been there personally, but are Americans and Canadians just blind letting that shit happen?
Well,
I don't.
Yeah, the problem is, I think it has to do with liberalism, out of control liberalism, right? Our brand of liberalism has swung so far to the left that it's radicalized now. I mean, we're in the Marxist territory now, right? And that's, I mean, we've been there for a while now, and we're just starting to see the fruits of that ideology. And that's why, if you've noticed, most liberal Western countries are swinging back toward the right, because we're realizing how badly we fucked up.
Oh man, I am deeply saddened by what they did to Canada. I used to point to Canada and say, look, Canada did it, so we can do it. I mean, you guys were a model country, some of the nicest white population in the world, not quite as nice as Asians, but almost. And it just a beautiful country. And during COVID, when I saw your president, using their horses to run over protesters and taking their bank accounts, and him getting on there screaming that fascist stuff, but in the same breath, he's claiming he's protecting democracy, I like to lost my damn mind. And Canada hasn't been the same since. No. And now from the outside looking in, I'm seeing a population of people who were abused for their first time, and they're shocked by it. We all got abused, but the poor Canadians, they didn't have to do that to y'all. I'll never forgive them for that.
Well, there was a lot of that. I mean, it was 3 years of draconian authoritarian, mandates and edicts coming down from our federal government, our far left federal government. That's Canada. I wrote an essay about this recently. But Canada, well, you read the essay. Canada serves as an example to the rest of the world of what happens in the modern day when you elect a far left government. And that's
beautiful essay too, by the way. Let me just congratulate you now. I have a bachelor's in speech and English, secondary education. So I love good writing. And when I saw your essay pop up, I started reading. I'm like, who is this motherfucker? He is so smart.
Oh, wow. Thanks, man.
Yeah, really good job, man. We need more of that. We need more of that. It made sense. It was smart, but you didn't write it like you were trying to sound smart. Those kind of writers. It was just beautiful, man. It was beautiful.
Well, thank you, sir. Well, that's basically it. I mean, I hope I at least captured most of what we experienced and are currently experiencing in Canada. I mean, I left British Columbia. I'm in Alberta now, which Alberta is referred to as Canada's Texas. And I've been to Texas. I could tell you we are exactly the same. I mean, if you took Texans and you put them in Alberta, you wouldn't even notice they're here.
I've never been more proud to live that I came from Texas. I used to be a little embarrassed because we were so hardcore law and order. But now that I've gotten older and I see how things have turned out, I'm proud to be from Texas. I tell you what, being raised in Texas prepared me for the rest of the world out here. I thought Venezuela was going to be rough. I thought the Amazon jungles of Brazil was going to be rough. I thought Mexico around the cartels was going to be rough. No fucking way. It was a cakewalk compared to the trailer parks of Texas that I grew up in. If you can make it through Texas, where I'm from, you can compete anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world.
Oh yeah, I've been to Texas. Texas is interesting because everybody has a fuck you attitude with the sweetest heart you'll ever know, right? So they're the sweetest people. But
we have the peace, this dichotomy going on.
That's right. Like,
fuck you, but peace, or
peace,
exactly. But
yeah. I'll love you till you fuck with me, then I'll shoot you. That's kind of So I want to go back to your story, babe, because I want to ask you, like, what was the pivotal moment like that kind of changed your perspective on the drug war?
It was my third wife.
Yeah.
My third wife. I was married 15 years. Then I was married 2 years. That was kind of a long, bad date. And then my third wife, she's the one who's deceased now. My best friend murdered her. Her and I were married 11 years. She was 10 years younger than me when I met her. And she's got me smoking weed. I was drinking every day, drinking vodka every day. And when I would smoke the weed, the vodka didn't taste good anymore. A lot of people report that. Like, you can't smoke weed and drink hard liquor. I couldn't. And I laughed and laughed and laughed. This is in my mid-30s. See, I didn't start really doing drugs till later on in my adult life after I had already been successful. But my third wife, oddly, led me away from God. She's the one who, because I used to be a preacher, she taught me that there wasn't a God. And she led me away from this prohibitionist mindset that drugs are bad. Now, weirdly, the last filming session I had with Netflix in a studio in Australia, it's about 4 weeks ago. They've got all the filming. 4 months ago, they threw a book down in front of me, said, "We have your former wife's diary here." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm the one who gave that to my kids." And I never would read it because it seemed disingenuous. It seemed snoopy. You know, I'm not the kind of guy who goes into people's phones and stuff like that. So I gave it to my daughters and they opened it, and every page she's praying to God. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, she's praying. Thank you, God. Help me, God. I'm like, that doesn't seem like the wife I was married to, because she's the one who convinced me there was no God. I've since re-explored all of that, and I'm on my way back in my spiritual life. But she's the one who helped change my mind that it was rotten arresting all those people, not a heroic thing, but a rotten thing. So I took her arguments along with using drugs myself, and I loved them. I'm not glorifying drug use, but I loved them. And then the internet was coming on strong, and I started Googling prohibition and stuff like that. I'm like, how the fuck did I miss? I didn't even know what the word prohibition meant. Literally, you tell me prohibition, I didn't know what it meant. So yeah, when faced with the right information, if you're right, I'll change. And I did. I flipped.
That's amazing, because, you know, most people, especially you being as good as you were at what you did, most people would kind of just shut that out, you know, and just pretend that it wasn't there because it's not in their best interest. I mean, for you, it was not in your best interest to quit what you were doing. I mean, you were arguably the top narcotics officer in the country at the time. So what, like, I mean, was it just pure, just courage? I mean, what drove you to decide, hey, you know what, I'm going to switch sides. I'm going to start teaching people how they can beat this system.
Well, I think good education. My mom, even in the universities, as I was on the debate team in universities, they taught me, look, don't argue to win an argument, argue to hopefully change your own mind. In other words, challenge the other narrative. And if it convinces you to change your mind, if the facts and evidence there, if you don't change your mind and change your stance, you're a coward. It's cowardly to hold on to a false belief. We've all had false beliefs, but you're right. A lot of people, for embarrassment or because they've propped up that narrative for so long, even though they know they're wrong, they'll still defend it. And I don't have respect for people who do that. You know, I'll tell you what we're missing, Jason. Here's an ingredient we're missing, and they quit teaching it to us on purpose, and it's courage and bravery. We're taught, if you don't feel it, don't do it. Like, no, that's too much stress. Instead of teaching, especially young men, look, I know you don't feel like going back to school and fighting that bully, but push past what you feel, use courage and bravery, and walk in their first period and go sock him in the damn face.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really hard thing to do, but it's a necessary thing. And a lot of people would argue with me about, well, that's violent. Well, you see what's happening with our society of pacifists. It's more violent than it's ever been. So pacifism breeds violence. Controlled use of force breeds men, real men.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, it really does. And I mean, for you to be the top narcotics officer in Texas, potentially the top narcotics officer in the country, to have a sudden change in heart and pivot the other direction. I mean, I think that's a prime example of that level of bravery, right? Because I mean, when you left the department, I mean, you were starting from zero, right? I mean, you had nowhere else to go, correct?
Yeah, and I lost all my friends. I'd been in law enforcement for so long. I only had law enforcement friends, so I lost my family. I lost everything I knew. Also dealing with that, there is no Santa Claus. I was also dealing with the fact that the stuff I did that I thought was heroic turns out to not be heroic. But like I said, because of the way I was raised, it was easy for me to switch. It was easy. My mom used to tell me, it doesn't matter if 1,000 people are in front of you telling you you're wrong. If you know you're right, you stand in front of those 1,000 people and you argue with them. So I didn't, at that moment that I left the police department, the drug task force, I didn't ask myself, you know, is this brave? Am I being a coward? None of those thoughts went through I just naturally took the new information I had and started telling the other side they were wrong, and this anti-prohibition side telling them they were right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So I want to talk about cop busters, because you actually helped a young woman get out of prison, a woman by the name of Yolanda Madden. And I actually followed that story quite closely, because what happened to her was just, I mean, it was fucking egregious. It was disgusting what they did to her. Can you talk about what happened to Yolanda Madden? Just briefly.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Her father, she had already served 4 years of an 8-year prison sentence in federal prison. You don't get people out of federal prison. Her father came to me and said, can you help get her out? I said, I can guarantee you I will bring attention to her case, but I don't think she's going to get out. So when she was released a year later, after that conversation, I was just as shocked as everybody. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, holy shit. Mm-hmm. But I did get her case attention by setting up a fake grow room in Odessa, Texas, in the same jurisdiction I used to work in. And I lured him into raiding, doing a false raid. And I had all the cameras there and the media there. So it embarrassed law enforcement. It brought attention to her case. The judge reopened her case and released her. Why was she in prison? It was called an informant plant. And I was familiar with that. I told the father, I said, this is an informant plant. He's like, what? I said, yeah. So the informant gave Yolanda a Game Boy bag and said, here, this is your son's Game Boy controller, because she's friends with the son. She goes, oh, thanks. She starts driving away and the police pull her over. She didn't know there was an ounce of methamphetamine in there.
Why
So
did they
she did.
why did they set her up, Barry?
Well, the informant was busted. They had a case on the informant, and they tell the informant, like I used to, go set somebody up and we'll drop your case. So the way the informant's supposed to do it is catch somebody with an ounce of methamphetamine and know they got it and then inform the police. But he put the ounce of methamphetamine on her. So it was an informant plan. It's the same as police planting the drugs, and the cops knew he did it. See, if an informant plants the drugs and the cops know it, that's as illegal as a cop planting the drugs. So she was released from federal prison, and I got raided.
Yeah, was that a direct response to your? I mean, you used cop busters. I actually watched the original video with the cops walking into the house. You guys had the note on the wall. I mean, you guys did everything to the letter of the law, right? You guys did not. Right. You guys were absolutely sure that you did everything correct, and you set these cops up. They were there illegally. They walked into that house illegally, and you basically humiliated them. Now, was your house raided in direct response to that?
Yes. After the success of that, I started doing what I call bag drop stings, and I would take like $50 marked US dollars and a simulated crack pipe and a drug ledger, and I would put it in a lunch pail that had a hidden GPS. This was back when GPS was new. So this was like some G4, Agent 99 type stuff. And I hid the GPS, and I would set it out like at a car wash and make a call. Say there's a suspicious bag at the car wash. Then I'd sit back with my camera and film, and I filmed the cop. Some of the cops turned it in. They would take the bag, we would track the GPS, and it went to the police station. Then I would do an opens records request and get the report. The cop says I was called to a suspicious bag, and I noticed this money in it and a crack pipe. So here it is all in the evidence room. That's how they're supposed to do it. But one cop from Williamson County, he threw everything away in the dumpster and kept the money. That's illegal. That's a felony. He tampered with evidence and he stole. So they raided me for that too. So I got raided. I'll tell you this real quick. This will help. Everybody told me that there was a conspiracy for law enforcement to get me. I didn't believe it. I didn't know the government worked like that. Mm-hmm. That's how dumb I was. Mm-hmm. But I kept getting raided and arrested. And then a hacker hacked some computer in Arizona, law enforcement computer, and got tens of thousands of police documents and posted them online. And in those documents was an FBI situational report, 3 pages, about me and cop busters. And there's a paragraph in there. The FBI is saying his success will end when the local law enforcement joins together to take him out of commission. Mm-hmm. So basically, the FBI was telling them form a conspiracy against this guy. So they had instructions from the FBI to do this. So the fake grow room raid that I got Yolanda out of prison in Odessa and the bad drops, they lumped all that stuff together and started raiding me and arresting me. That's what happened. And it worked. It worked. I went up against the most powerful cartel. Well, I don't want to call them a cartel, but they're similar, against the most powerful government in the world. Mm-hmm. And they protect their positions very strong. They take that shit serious. They didn't think it was funny. They didn't think I deserved an award because I was busting crooked cops. They believed I should be in prison or dead. And the last arrest went right before I decided to flee to Venezuela. The last arrest, that cop's hand was shaking like this. Don't you move, Barry Cooper. I'll shoot you.
Yeah.
And I started thinking, oh, shit, now I'm going to give one of these cops a name. They're trying to make a name for themselves, saying I'm the one who shot Barry Cooper. That's when I got the hell out of Dodge, and I haven't been back. So they took all that very serious. It was retaliation at a whole different level. I'm almost finished, but I'm not a victim. I'm not a victim, and I'm not bitter. I'm not upset. I understand why they did that to me. It's still not right, but I understand why they did that. And I picked the fight. So if you pick a fight and you get retaliated on, you can't run around crying like you're the victim, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't feel any animosity or bitter at all. My animosity and bitterness, if it's there, is to that they're still doing it to people. They're still putting people in jail for cannabis.
Yeah.
That aggravates me. Not what they did to me, but what they're still doing to some of these people, because I've got I got 8 cases right now. I keep cases on my desk. I get paid really well to be expert witness on drug cases. I work with my client's lawyer. So I'm reading police reports every week, constantly watching videos, and I haven't quit for 15 years. And I thought by now, Jason, it would be over. When I left the United States, I thought, well, in about 5 years, the drug war will be ended and I can come back. It got worse, man. It got worse.
Yeah. And I mean,
I'm so sad. I'm sad about my country.
Yeah. Well, look, I'll say this. I think potentially you were poking the bear a little bit with Cop Busters, but I think you were doing a huge service, because you were showing how corruption in law enforcement is locking people away for insane periods of time. I mean, Yolanda Madden got 8 years in federal prison. She served 4. When she was let out, did the state pay her any money? Did she sue them?
No, the judge ordered a new trial. And instead of going through that new trial, they offered her a plea bargain. Said, if you plead guilty, you don't go back to prison. So she pled guilty. So there was no way she could sue and retaliate on the state. I'll tell you one worse than that. I got an email from a 25-year-old young black man in Florida. He had a what's that frog? The Ninja Turtle frog backpack. It was old. He took a picture of it. He said, Sir Barry, I've been carrying this around since I was 5 years old when they put my dad in prison for marijuana seeds. Oh. And I can't get anybody to look at that case. This is when I was in Venezuela at a very hot moment in my life where I was having to really be on my toes. I said, send me what you got in that pack and I'll read it. And I read through it. I'm like, they have a black man in Texas. He was sentenced to 30 years federal prison. He had already served 15 years and he had 15 years left for fucking marijuana seeds, bro. So I wrote a big article about how, the Canadian activist Mark Emery sold all those seeds to the U.S. and he only got 5 years. And it turns out the same judge who released Yolanda is the judge on this case. He's not the one who sentenced him. The judge who sentenced him died. So I knew it was going to be easy for a judge to go ahead and rule against the former dead judge, because judges don't normally like to rule against each other. So I played that to my advantage. Within a year of me taking that case, he was out of prison. They deported him back to Jamaica, and on Christmas Day, he was hugging his old mama.
Oh, that's
on the airport runway. It was freaking beautiful.
So in your mind, look, I mean, I can't even justify prison terms like that for heroin, but cannabis. So full disclosure, I'm a nightly cannabis user. I use cannabis every night. For me, it's a meditation, I guess, tool or resource. It has a meditative quality to me. I smoke a half a joint at the end of the night, helps me relax, helps kind of take all the shit out of my head and just kind of, set the night off, man. Set the night off right,
Good for you. That's a healthy way to live.
Yeah. And I lived a long time without using cannabis. I mean, I started using cannabis again, maybe, I don't know, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago. But prior to that, I was so stressed out all the time, and I didn't have anything that kind of helped me meditate and just let my mind go or help my mind let go of things that were in there that didn't need to be in there anymore. And why do you think they've targeted marijuana the way that they have? Because I've always wondered this, from what I understand, and this may be a very rudimentary understanding of the science, but we have receptors in our body that are designed to receive cannabis, right? It's the only plant. It's the only it's the only plant. It's the only what's the word I'm looking for? Organic material that we have receptors in our brains designed specifically to receive what it has.
That's right. That's
so
right.
it serves some sort of purpose, one that we're not quite sure or aware of yet, I don't think. But why have they targeted marijuana in this? Why is it a Schedule 1 drug? I mean, it's nowhere near as destructive as, say, methamphetamine or cocaine or heroin or anything like that. So why is it still classified in the same way?
You know, I've wondered the same thing, and I'm certain your audience has wondered the same thing. And I pulled my brain and took all the experience I had trying to figure it out. And the only thing I can come up with, Jason, is they keeping marijuana illegal because they still think it harms the workforce. Like, I think they've done studies. They've taken a group of people who smoke marijuana versus a group of people that don't, and say they get 2 hours a week more efficient work out of the people who don't smoke marijuana. Well, they multiply that 2 hours times how many million of people are in the United States, and they go, okay, we've lost 3.5 billion hours of work because of marijuana use, so we're going to make it illegal. Now, marijuana first started being illegal for a racist reason. And I'm the first one to have said this on mainstream media. You can go see it on one of my Fox News interviews. I explained that who was that guy way back when that he got marijuana illegal by saying it causes white women to seek relations with Negroes.
Oh, I don't know who it was that said that, but
yeah, Anslinger, Harry Anslinger. He was the new head of DEA, but back then they called it something else. And he testified before Congress that marijuana makes you psychotic and it causes white women to seek relations with Negroes. That's just racist. And it was seen in the Mexican communities the most. So to deal with the minorities that were quote unquote out of control, they made marijuana illegal so they could arrest all those minorities, similar to crack cocaine to arrest all the black guys. But yeah, I think they have poor data. I think they think marijuana harms. I went back to get my master's in international relations, and that's where I learned. I knew armies were important for a country to be successful. I knew militaries were important, but the economy is just as important. The economy for countries, if you know it or not, that is super important in international relations. It's important to politicians. It's important because it's a measure of what society is doing. And you start tapping into that and fucking with that, and they're going to pull back. And for some reason, they have the data that marijuana smokers work less or they're lazy. Number two, I think they also know the power of how marijuana will cause you to say no to your boss. You know, you'll quit believing all that shit. That's what it did to me. I told you my third wife that got me smoking marijuana, I would smoke it and I would start thinking different. I would start thinking different. And my thinking was anti-government.
Yeah.
So I think cannabis brings about compassion and a spirit of truthfulness inside of a person's soul. And that doesn't work well with their propaganda.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah. So the marijuana is directly in conflict with the labor force and the noodle up here. And they know that. That's the only reason I can think they still got it illegal.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense.
I mean, we've decriminalized it in Canada and, you know, I mean, it hasn't really impacted anything in terms of, you know, in fact, for me, at least, I feel like if I smoke a joint the night before, I get out of bed a lot easier the next morning. You know, I'm not carrying all that shit around. But okay, so you become an anti-drug war advocate. Now, I want to ask you, you know, did you see a lot of corruption in the police force, you know, while you were a narcotics officer? Like, were you experiencing a lot of other cops planting drugs on people and you know, jacking people up for you know, trumped up charges pretty much?
I did not see a lot of that. I've never seen anybody plant drugs, and I've never planted drugs. Mm-hmm. Now, later in my law enforcement career, I would take $100 or $200 out of a drug stash. I am more ashamed and embarrassed of that than anything I did in law enforcement is I stole drug money and I knew it was wrong and I did it anyway.
Yeah, but that's gotta be
that's actually
pretty
worse.
common.
Yeah, it really wasn't. Not the men I hung around. I'll tell you what was common if you call this corruption, but what I saw a lot of was violating people's civil rights. Lying on reports, searching them when I didn't have probable cause and making up the probable cause, getting our drug dog to false alert. In 2006, when I released that traffic stop video, I was the whistleblower on drug dog's false alert. And the people lost their damn minds when I came out on the news and said, cops make their dogs false alert. Because there's only three probable causes a cop can search your car: plain sight, an informant tip, or a canine alert, unless you have consent. But I'm talking about probable causes: an informant tip, plain sight, where the officer sees the drugs out in plain sight, and a canine alert. So if you didn't get a tip and I didn't see anything plain sight, and I would run my dog around the car after they refused consent, if my dog didn't alert, I had to let him go. And I didn't like that. So I taught my dog to false alert. I could give him a little command and he would jump up and scratch. And I go, there, now I'm going to search your car. So the corruption that and being rough with people, arresting them and going overboard physically with them, we were too rough. It's a lot of that. But in terms of planting drugs, stealing money, no. I'm certain other task force did that, but that wasn't embedded in my task force. If it was, I didn't see it.
Yeah, I mean, the stealing money thing makes sense, right? Because it's drug money, right? If there's $1,000 in the glove box and 900 ends up in the evidence locker, who knows the difference, right? But
right,
still
wrong though. Still bad, wrong.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm not condoning it, but I do understand it, right?
Sure.
Now, so you make the pivot, you go through this, just repeated raids on your home, and you decide, okay, I got to get the fuck out of here. But first, your son is taken from you. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because that story in itself to me is completely absurd.
Yeah. So my son is autistic. He's my stepson. And the father, who I still think molested him, he was just a shit father. But this conspiracy I told you about, where the FBI told local law enforcement to gather and shut me down, part of that was law enforcement and the lawyers who hated me contacting my son's real father, because he had the power to really fuck me up. And he filed an emergency order to take our son. After we busted those cops, boom, we let our son go for visitation to East Texas. And when we went to try to get him back, we were served with an order that we couldn't get him back. So my wife went a month without seeing her autistic son. And it was at the hands of the evil father and the government all working together they try to make us look like bad parents. They couldn't catch me with a felony. Even those raids on my house, those were misdemeanor raids. I've never raided anybody for a misdemeanor. You're not supposed to, but they did me. And they kept trying to show that we were bad parents. They kept trying to prove or show that we were giving our kids drugs. We were not. I said, drug test them. And thank goodness Travis County stepped in. They sent their most high profile CPS agent to work our case. He did a thorough investigation, and he later said in his report that the kids look happy, healthy, and well cared for to me. There's no abuse going on. But by then it was too late. We were already wrapped up in court in East Texas. So after they took my son by the emergency order, they forced us into a trial over there, and we lost him permanently. My wife the only thing she kept were visitation rights to see her. And listen, when you see the videos of this, they've done test audiences. These big films, these multi-million-dollar films, they do test audiences, and they did with my film, and not a dry eye, they say, in the theater. And I know it has to be that part where my autistic son is screaming for the mother, and the mother's crying, and I had to deal with that every fucking week while I was working on my cases, while I was in court, while I was busting cops, while I was being Barry Cooper. I tell you what, for a decade, Jason, for a decade, I lived in fight or flight mode 24/7. Didn't know any other way. As soon as I woke up, it was time to fight or run. And I lived like that for 10 years, thinking that's how life is. I had no idea I was in fight or flight mode until a skunk, Skunk Magazine, they sent a writer to do an interview with me. And he said, dude, you got PTSD. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, you're hyper vigilant. I said, what's hyper vigilant? He said, well, when somebody knocks on the door, the whole house runs and locks the door and you're checking everything. That's called hypervigilance. I thought that's just how you live. I didn't know that wasn't normal. So I lived that for 10 years. Like I said, later in Mexico, started doing too many drugs, became a drug addict. But now that I'm living in the Philippines, this is where I got healed. And it's going to show that in this documentary. I have zero PTSD symptoms. I quit drinking for one. I quit drinking 4 years ago. No drugs, exercise, eat healthy. And now if there's a loud noise in the house, it's just another loud noise. Right. It's not a cop coming through the door. So I have that drug war really rattled my cage, bro.
Oh,
they got their point across, but now I'm better. So I'm proof that you can go through a whole lot of drama and trauma. And if you keep getting up, dressing up, and show up, you're going to continue to win in this video game. Because this documentary is less about the drug war and more about how to keep bouncing back. And I filmed everything too. My crazy moments, everything. And I didn't pick through the tapes. I had the tapes hidden in 3 different places in the US. When I signed the movie deal, I had them ship those tapes. I said, now listen, you may even find some porn in there. Me and one of my wives, filming our own porn. I don't know what's in there, but I'm not going to hand pick and just give you the good parts. I want you to see all of it. So you're going to see all of it. And by the way, they did find some porn. my second wife, me and my second wife.
So going back to the timeline. So your guys' CPS comes in, tries to take your son away. You guys get him back in your custody. And that's the point where you guys decide it's time to get out of here.
Yes, I had already planned that once I got my cases done, I didn't want to flee while I was in the middle of my cases. Then I'd have a bunch of warrants for not showing up in court. So I got all of that done. I had planned this for months. So the instant my cases were dismissed and I reached that plea bargain, within 30 days, I was gone. I was on a cruise ship. We left from Florida, went to Aruba to Venezuela.
Wow.
Because I promised my wife, I said, what do you want to do? I wanted to go back and bust cops. When they raid me and stuff, as soon as they would leave, I'm like, I'd be planning another cop sting. And that's overzealous, right?
Yeah.
But I listened to my wife and she said, can you just fix it where me and Zach aren't ever apart? I'm like, is that the most important thing to you? Is that what you want? Yep. And I always gave all my wives anything they wanted. I loved all my wives dearly, and I was always very close to them. And just because a marriage ends doesn't mean it failed. My marriages didn't fail. They just ended. People grow apart. But so I promised her, I said, okay, I'm going to figure out how to keep you and Zach together. And that's when I came up with the plan to take them to Venezuela. We lived on a beach. Had a good time, except it was, like I said, it's kind of violent there.
Yeah. Yeah. So now you have this Netflix documentary series coming out on your life, which, if there's anybody, I think that warrants a documentary series, it's you. And I mean, how does it feel to finally be able to, tell your story in full to a wide audience?
It feels good, not necessarily, just so you know, on the outside looking in, you see this story as an incredible story. When you're living it, you just see it as everyday life. So the only reason I know it's a good story is because everybody wanted to buy it. And Netflix is spending millions of dollars with the Tiger King executive producer making the story out of my life. But I'm glad this documentary is coming out more for the reason that I feel like I have something to say and I feel like I have something to teach. And if you're not relevant, people don't hear you. And if you become relevant, they all of a sudden want to know what you have to say. And I got so much to say. I feel like I've been in a cave for a decade. And I had to, I used that time to educate myself more, to get healed, to hopefully become more sophisticated. Now I'm ready to get out of this fucking cave and start helping at a much higher level. Now, this movie hasn't been just all roses. Weirdly and crazy enough, my own daughter, and you will see this in the Netflix, my own daughter, and we were a very close hippie family, they thought I killed their mother. When their mother drowned in Florida next to her boyfriend, who was my best friend, he was 4 feet away from her. They blamed me for her death. They thought I killed her. Well, it turns out before she died, she had convinced my kids that I had murdered somebody and nobody knew it. And her motive was to take this movie deal and to take Never Get Busted. So my wife and my 2 daughters were scamming and planning to take Never Get Busted because they knew I had this movie deal and they wanted part of it. So it's called parental alienation, to get my kids to turn against me because we were so close. I was that hippie father. We did everything together. She knew she had a lie, so she convinced them that I was a violent person and that I had murdered somebody, and they turned on me. When they learned that Billy was sentenced to life, he's in prison now in life, 3 years after her murder. He went to trial. They found him guilty, of course. Then it's like, okay, Dad didn't murder her, but I'm going to call the FBI about this guy he murdered a long time ago. And they started calling the police. Now, the daughter that was doing this, she's got a pill problem, alcohol problem. So when she called the FBI, and this is just 2 years ago, when she called to these people and said I'd murdered somebody, they called me and said, look, we don't believe you murdered anybody. We can tell she's screwed in her gourd. And it's so hard for me to talk about my own daughter, even if I'm defending myself, because to defend myself, I have to talk bad about her. And what father sits there and enjoys talking bad about their own kid? Now, she's a grown woman now. She's 25, 26 years old. So when that didn't work, calling the FBI about somebody I didn't murder, she called one of my Facebook friends who recorded it, and she claimed that I had raped, molested, and tortured her for years. Listen, I'm old school. My daughters haven't even seen me in my underwear. So to hear that shit come from her. So here's the thing. With attention comes that type of bullshit. So I found myself having to defend myself in some of this filming with Netflix. They said, well, what about this? Well, what about this? Well, what about this? And I had to tell my side of the story. So it's not all roses for me. I'll tell you, I signed the deal 4 years ago, and this last 4 years, I'm glad I quit drinking.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like your life has just been one constant roller coaster. I mean, to be accused of murder, especially murdering your wife, that's so, just to go back on that. So that her boyfriend, who was your best friend, he's the one who's currently in prison for her actual murder.
That's right. When we were in Mexico, I invited my best friend from Florida to come visit us. My wife and that best friend fell in love. They were just alcohol saturated. They're both alcoholics. My deceased wife's bad alcoholic. In fact, her blood alcohol content upon death, the autopsy came back, is 0.45, not 0.25, not 0.35, 0.45. And I knew she was a bad alcoholic, but I understood it was because of them taking her kid and all the stuff we did and running through Venezuela and Brazil. I thought she would get over it, but she didn't. It kept getting worse and worse and worse. She fell in love with my best friend. They went to Florida, left me. I was alone in Mexico. 6 months later, he caught her in bed with another woman on a cruise. They took a cruise. He's opened the door and she was in bed with another woman, and they had promised that they weren't going to cheat on each other. So he kicked her out, and my other best friend from East Texas went to Florida and got her, and they became lovers. He's the one who murdered her.
Wow.
Drowned her, strangulation and drowning.
Oh my God.
on a deserted, secluded beach. We think he killed her in the hotel room and took her to the beach, staged it, make it look like a drowning. But yeah, I'm not crying now. You don't see me all distraught, but I was when I learned my kids thought I had killed her. And no matter what I said, they would not listen to any evidence. Have you ever been right? And to prove you're right, you just give handfuls of evidence, but the more evidence you give, the worse it gets. That's what was happening to me. And I was so fucking devastated, bro. That's how I wound up a drug addict. I used to just party on drugs, and all of a sudden I'm in the middle of this, started using a little more, use a little more, use more. Next thing I know, I'm an addict.
Wow.
I was devastated, and I had to get healed from all of that. So you're looking at a healed Barry. If I'm not crying now and all that, just understand I went through that process of devastation, losing my family. I lost everything. When I met Mia, I had a beautiful little condo. I always kept a nice house and one suitcase full of stuff. When Mia and I came to the Philippines, we had 2 suitcases full of stuff. Her suitcase and my suitcase. Started all over from scratch.
That's a wild life, man. I mean, you've started over multiple times. And I mean, you must have, I mean, what's it like to go through life without any real foundation underneath you and to constantly be betrayed over and over and over again?
I wish somebody would have prepared me for it. I didn't have older people teaching me, hey, Barry, as you go throughout life, your best friends, your wife, your pastor, they're all going to fuck you over. My pastor, who I learned to preach under, he had an affair with my first wife.
Whoa.
He admitted it. He fell at my feet. Oh, I'm so sorry, Barry. I'm so sorry. I'm like, Jake, get up. I'm just leaving your church. I always had beautiful wives, right? All my wives have been beautiful, but nobody told me that my best friends and the pastor would be after him. But I'll tell you this. Being betrayed by people that are close to you is a part of American culture. It's not like that here in Asia, but it's part of American culture. And if you know that's going to happen, it doesn't devastate you as bad when it does happen because you expect it. Right. But I wasn't expecting any of this. It was one friend, one wife after another. I mean, putting the screws to me. And you know what the root of all of it was? Most of it? Fucking jealousy. Jealousy, man. You know, the Bible says jealousy is crueler than the grave. So I was taught anywhere there's cruelty, there's probably jealousy. And I've found that to be true. It turns out these motherfuckers that I thought were my friends and my pastor, I thought they were going along with me as I was growing. They were riding on my coattail and jealous the whole time and just waiting for a moment where they thought I would slip. And when they thought I slipped, they stick the knife in my back. Hurt. You have no idea because I'm a good friend. I'm the best friend anybody can ever have. I'm loyal to the core. I don't fuck people over. I can keep secrets, obviously, the type of work I do. So I'm a really good friend to have. But they don't teach friendships in the United States. They don't teach what you're supposed to do to be a good friend. It's just everybody fucking everybody.
Yeah.
Sad. It's the culture.
Yeah. And I mean, I think in your case, man, you know, just from my assessment, I think you're a pure soul. And I think pure souls have a hard time with that because of the undying loyalty and because of your willingness to be vulnerable, you know? And
I've been told that.
And I think that's what I gather. You know, you're a colorful guy, but I could tell that you're a sweetheart, man. And people like that, people like you tend to attract shitty people. You know, I'm a similar way. I'm less colorful. I'm more blacks and whites and grays, but you know, I'm very much the same way. And I've attracted a lot of those people in my life as well. But you know, my response has always been to kind of make my circle smaller and smaller, just kind of keep constricting it and just keep cutting out the weak people. Now that I'm older, I'm able to recognize weak people a lot faster, and I don't allow weak people near me because exactly what you're describing, the type of people that that you attracted, and the same type of people that I attracted at times in my life. They're weak people, and they're looking to latch on to a strong person, right? And
100%.
yeah, and so
That's a correct analysis right there. And I've since learned, especially meeting my wife that I've been with now for 8 years. She's a Filipina, and Asians have an incredible amount of wisdom. And that's the first thing she brought to my attention, is that all these people around you are screwing you, Barry. Well, you know, so I went through that process too. And now I'm not a hermit. But nobody gets next to me. Nobody gets close to me. I got a circle of 7 people who help me run this machine, and that's fucking it. And they're all family except 2. So I'm positioning myself, because I know this big moment's about to happen. I'm positioning myself because I'm going to have enough flying through the air, enough balls up in the air as it is, to not have that poisonous person in my life, like my former pastor and my best friends and my snaky ass wives. They're not going to be in the picture this time because I'm not letting any new people in. I can't in the position I am. I can't. It's life or death. If I go out and I slip and I start making friends and bringing them home, I got a lot to lose. And you know, for some reason, men, and I don't mean to, but a lot of men get intimidated around me for no reason at all. They get intimidated, they get jealous, and I don't mean to bring these emotions up in them. I've learned it's something in them. It's not me doing anything wrong. I'm just living. But it turns out there's a lot of men like that. A lot of men who are instead of cheering on success, instead, they're mad and angry and jealous of your success. So, yeah, I don't let them in. Just like you said, I got a small circle. And I know a lot of people say that because it's like the popular thing to say, like, I got a small circle, but I do. I'm unfucking touchable in terms of civilians getting me. Now, the government can come get me whenever they want. If the government wants you, they're going to get you. So me being over here in the Philippines is not keeping them from getting me. I'm here in the Philippines strictly because of the lifestyle. You know, like I said, I don't have any more symptoms of PTSD. It feels good.
So do you still feel like they're out for you? Like they want to bring you in? Do you feel like they're, yeah. I'm on
Interpol. That's probably a reason why I have 108,000 subscribers on my Never Get Busted Live channel. By the way, y'all join me Tuesday nights, Never Get Busted Live. And you can also join NGB 400. It's the only activist group in the world. It's $15 a month. And we review real police reports and we get real people out of jail. You know, this business I have, Expert Witness, I've opened them up. And twice a week we meet on Zoom. Sometimes we have emergency meetings. And I teach the members how to spot holes in police reports and police videos. And then we generate a report and give it to my client's lawyer to help them out. So join us, Never Get Busted Live and the NGB 400. And I got to talking so fast. What was I talking about, Jason? There was a point I was making.
Well, you actually, you lit something up in my head that we can pivot in that direction. NGB 400. That's a fantastic idea, man. I was reading a little bit about it on your website. Can you go into that a little bit more? Because, I mean, you guys are actually getting people out of prison.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd love to talk about it. For years, I wanted to duplicate what I did. But because of what I do is so unique, it takes a lot of time. So if I trained one person to do what I did, it would take a year or 2 of training. And then if that one person left, I was right back me doing it myself. So I decided to just make it an activist group. It's $15 a month and you actually meet with me and we actually look at real police reports. First thing I do is teach search and seizure through the eyes of a cop. I said, look, y'all, I had to learn how I could search that person's car. That's how I learned there's only 3 ways you can search a car. Plain sight, informant tip, or a canine alert. That's how I learned that, because I'm on the highway thinking, okay, how can I search this motherfucker? So I had to learn my laws really good, and I've broken those down in what we call an NGB 400 cheat sheet. And when you learn this cheat sheet, you can pour through any search warrants, through any traffic stop videos or any buy busts, and you can point out what the cops did wrong, we have a good time. Now, we only want smart people, serious people. Don't show up not sober, because these are recorded, and I don't want the courts to see us as some ragtag hippie group. We're not. We're a very serious foundation, and that's something else I look forward to when Netflix airs. I'm ready to fill that class up. We've got less than 50 members now, and I want to get 5,000. I want to get 50,000. Because there's so much garbage on the internet about law enforcement. There's a ton of police channels, some really good police channels, but most of them have it wrong. Most of them are so bent on hating cops that everything the cops do is wrong, right? So that kind of waters down when a cop really does do something wrong. So I explain, okay, the cops were right here. The cops were wrong here. Now let's free our client. And I'm ready for that to scale up like it's going to after they air the documentary.
Yeah, and you still do a lot of expert witness work as well, right? I mean, you definitely you help a lot of people who have been, wrapped up in something that maybe they shouldn't be wrapped up in, or they're getting, charged with something heavier than they should be. You do a lot of work for people in that way, right?
Literally every day. Every day I'm reviewing a case, or I'm on the phone with an American who has a case. I got 8 cases right now. I try not to get more than 10. But just less than a month ago, I got 200 pounds of marijuana dismissed.
Wow.
They raided the guy. They got 200 pounds of marijuana, and I got it dismissed. I'll tell you how. They gave me the discovery. They already had 2 lawyers look at it. He said, okay, Barry, I'll hire you, but it's a long shot. I think they got me. With my experience, they didn't include the actual buy. Like normally, if you're going to go in, if the informant's going to go in and buy drugs and come out, the officer puts in his report that I checked the money, I marked the money, I gave him this amount of money, I watched him go in the door and come out and bring me the drugs. They left that out of the report. You know why? I told my client, I said, I'll bet you that informant stole some money, because that happens a lot. It turns out he did. So he went to his lawyer and said, look what Barry found. The lawyer told the prosecutor, I think y'all have some missing discovery. And the prosecutor says, oh yeah, sorry, here's 45 more pages. And when we reviewed that 45 pages, it clearly talked this description. The officer gave him drug money. He went in, came back out. The informant gave him 10 pounds of marijuana. They raided it and got 200 pounds of marijuana. But they didn't put in there that the informant was supposed to leave $10,000, but he only left $7,000. He put the other $3,000 in his shoe. So he stole the buy money. Why is that important? Because now the informant is not credible anymore. For this to work for cops, there's that word credible. Well, this takes away his credibility. So the government had to dismiss the case. I do stuff like that all the time. That's what I do.
And I mean, there's obvious monetary motivation for that, but are there other motivations for doing that type of work for you?
Sure. Everything I've done all my life, I've always enjoyed it and made money at it. For instance, I went and rode a limousine back when I was 25, 26 years old. And I'm like, holy shit, I love limousines. So I went and bought a limousine. The payments were $1,000 a month, and I rented out on the weekend. And one weekend I would earn the $1,000, go pay the bank. Then I had it rest of the month free to do whatever I want, to party in it or to rent it out. I made a lot of money doing that. The same with my DVDs. You know, those DVDs I told you when I flipped? I did that to make money, but it was something I was passionate about too. So yes, this expert witness thing, that's what's paid my bills for 15 years. That's how I live abroad, because all I need is a laptop to review evidence, get on the phone and talk to a lawyer, and I get paid really good to do it. The problem was there were too many poor people, and I was doing their cases for free, and I had to quit. So that's another NGB 400 perk. These people that contact me that can't pay my exuberant fees, because I charge between $5,000 and $20,000 a case. Most people can't afford that. So guess what I'm doing now? I let the NGB 400. We'll meet on a Thursday and say, look, this is one we want to adopt. Let's read the report. Let's make a report. Let's work with them. We've got two clients now at NGB 400 that we're trying to free. In the middle of working those 2 cases, that's when I teach.
Wow. So your schedule is pretty jam-packed.
I stay busy. I take time to myself, but yeah, I love my job. Mia said the other night, somebody was saying something about me working. And I said, I work probably 4 or 5 days a week. She said, you work 7 days a week. You work 7 days a week. And she's right. Now, I still have time for her, but I'm always thinking up here, especially with this documentary coming out. I got to be on my toes. I got to pray for wisdom. I got to pray for humility, a whole lot of things that I've got to be for this blessing to not become a curse.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I work a lot.
Yeah. So I know we both got to get running here pretty soon, but I want to talk to you about the spiritual aspect of it, because, you know, you talked about at one point, you know, you would, I guess your wife had led you down a path where, you know, you no longer believed in God, and then you slowly found your way back to that. Can you talk about that journey a little bit?
Sure. And that's recent. I thought, well, if she's right about the drug war, and she is, then maybe she's right about Jesus. And listen, I was a dedicated Christian most all my life, and especially when I was a preacher. I didn't sin. People say you sin every day. Okay, whatever. I didn't sin, meaning I didn't cheat on my wife. I didn't steal. I didn't screw people. In fact, I don't understand how a Christian cannot not sin. It's just too easy to live a fruitful life and not cheat on your wife and steal money and harm people, right? So it's not a hard thing to not sin. And I was like that, and I was very dedicated Christian. And then so when I turned away and renounced all of that, well, if there is a God, it's a good thing he's got mercy and tenderness and patience, because he was merciful to me. He was tender and he was patient. Because I recently, after I told you 4 months ago when they put that diary in front of me, and I saw that she'd been praying the whole time. She's the one who turned me away from God. It reminded me of Eve, Adam and Eve. You know, Eve lured Adam away, said, here, there is no God. Candy did the same thing to me. And I started noticing, especially COVID, I couldn't help but notice prophecies in the Bible were coming true. For instance, you know, there's a Bible prophecy that talks about the mark of the beast, and you can't buy any food without it. You can't trade without it. Well, we sort of went through that when we had to have our vaccine card. And I have a feeling this digital thing that they're coming out with the digital money, if you're not a good boy, you can't eat. They'll just shut your money off, right? I think that's where we're headed. Mm-hmm. But back to my spiritual thing, I started noticing the prophecies, and then I remembered that closeness that I always felt with God, and I missed it. I was always close to God. He like walked with me. I talked to him all the time. I probably prayed more than any 5 preachers. And I'm not doing the real religiosity type praying, like to make me look good, or I'm going to pray 30 minutes. No, I was talk to God. My mother taught me that. And I was always close to him, and I missed it. And I realized whether God is real or not, his principles and ways makes for a better life. So I lived the conservative Christian life. Then I lived the hippie drug life, and loved both of them. But to have a more enriched life is the conservative life. So I recently, you know, I went back to Jesus. Mm-hmm. I still have a lot of questions, but I recently said, hey, you know, God, I'm sorry, you know, for talking to you like that. I wasn't sorry for going out and doing drugs and getting into bar fights. That didn't bother me. What bothered me is some of the stuff I said to God on my way out. You know, but I thought he betrayed me, bro. I thought God had betrayed me because the pain was so the emotional pain I went through actually created a physical pain right here. Mm-hmm. I could feel physically it hurting. And I thought, you tricked me. all those years I served you and you fucking tricked me. You did this to me. The fuck's wrong with you, God? Just like that, and worse. But now that I've had time to see and look back and look forward and see what the world's turning into, and I've lived different lives, I went back to I went back to Jesus with this last year.
Me too.
So whether Jesus is real or not, I think he is, but even if he's not, it doesn't hurt to believe in something. That's the thing. That it is true that if you don't believe in anything, you will fall for everything. I think that's the little thing they say. But yeah, so who knows what's going to happen? Who knows what's going to happen? I know the churches I went to a long time ago, they believed in the gifts of the Holy Spirit, prophecy, speaking in tongues, all of that. And for years, preachers would call me out and prophesy over me that I would go through the worst fire that you could ever feel. I would be ground to powder, but don't quit, because when I reemerge, I'll never forget this prophecy. When I reemerge, my voice will be heard at all four corners of the earth. Now, I'm not interpreting that I'm going to go back to preaching. Who knows? But I am interpreting it as I've got something to share and something to save to help humans. I don't want to fight anymore. I want to heal. Like, I turn from a warrior into a healer. Other people can go out there and shoot at each other and all that. I'm not going to. I want to be the ambulance that drives up and helps kind of clean up the mess. That's sort of how I see myself, as somebody who just, it's so cliche, isn't it, to say to help others, but I really do like helping others. That's what I like to do. When I see them in a position in life and I'm like, I can fix that. That's what I love to teach.
I think it's a beautiful thing, man. I think it's a beautiful thing. And, my life hasn't been nearly as wild as yours, but we parallel each other in the same way in spiritually. I've been called back this year myself. So, I totally get where you're coming from. Yeah. It's been
How'd
really
that
cool.
feel?
It was,
what led you away?
Well, it's a long story, but I mean, my dad was a born again evangelical Christian. Growing up, he struggled with drug and alcohol addictions, and he was part of some really questionable churches, cult-like behavior, and it just turned me off. My experiences going to those churches and being around those people just turned me off, because I was around the wrong kind of Christians. And I was never a non-believer. I never went through an atheist period in my life. I always believed in a God. I just considered myself agnostic. And earlier this year, I just, we were talking about it a bit before we started recording, but, my writing really took off out of nowhere. And, all of the success that I've experienced thus far has been completely organic. I haven't paid $1 for any of the exposure or anything that I've had. It's just all kind of happened.
Congratulations, man. Congratulations. Because you have a notable reach. Yeah.
Well, thank you, sir. And I just know that God is at work in my life. I just know that it's strange. And I'm sure you can relate to this, but when God's calling you, you hear it. You just know it. It's unlike anything else you've heard before. And that's what happened to me. I just heard God calling, and I knew immediately what it was. And it was strange. It's something intrinsic. It's inside of you. It's not, it's something innate. It's
spiritual.
Yeah. It's something completely internal. And I just felt it. And yeah. And so I just went with it, man. Because my life, like I said, my life has not been nearly as crazy as yours, and isn't nearly as fascinating as your story is. But, I've been through a lot of ups and downs, and I've been through a lot of things in my life. And it's funny, because you were talking about what led you there, and at times feeling like you had been betrayed. And I felt the same way. I felt at times that I had been abandoned by God. And I just felt like that relationship was just one that wasn't meant for me, one that I wasn't going to have. But Now, in
Wow.
retrospect, I know that I went through everything that I've been through in order to get here, so that when I heard that calling, I knew exactly what it was. And all of the
That
shit.
familiar voice.
That's right. But all that shit that I went through, it was a prerequisite for me being here now. And, you telling your story and me listening to everything that you've had to say, I think it's a similar situation for you. I think everything that you've gone through, as wild as your life has been, was a prerequisite for you being here now, and
Yeah,
yeah, please go.
it's okay. Sorry to interrupt, but it's kind of like, if people are going to down me for believing in Jesus, it's sort of unjustified, because it should be, oh, all that happened to him, and you know what he did? He went back to Jesus.
Yeah.
I'm not killing people, I'm not robbing, I'm not in prison, thank God. I'm not hurting anybody, so it should be cheered on. Unfortunately, for some reason, do you feel like sometimes when you tell people you're a Christian that they think you're a little crazy? Do you ever feel that?
I do, but when they do that, I feel bad for them. Like, for myself, it's still very early. I don't know if I would necessarily call myself a full-fledged Christian, but my connection to God is established and it's there,
Mm.
and uh I talk to God on a daily basis. I have those conversations every single day. And it's exactly the way you described it. It's not sitting there with your hands together, on your knees, praying in the traditional way. It's just me walking around my house talking to God, or in my car having a conversation with God. And, I when people look at
That
me,
shit works. It
oh
works.
boy, oh boy,
It
does it
works.
ever. And I'll tell you a story, because I think this will resonate with you, and I think you'll like it. So
We'd love to hear it.
October 25th of this year, I was working a job. I was working at a company where I was doing the work of about 3 or 4 people. Around summertime this last year, I started to get chest pains, and my fingertips were going numb, and I was sweating profusely in my sleep. I was on the verge of a heart attack, man. Like, I was right there.
Mm.
And at the same time, my writing was taking off, and I was trying to balance the two, but I couldn't really manage the two, so I'm here in Alberta, our first snow of the year, and I'm taking all the back roads because the highway is a disaster, right? Of course, nobody has winter tires on their cars yet, so everybody's sliding around. And I'm telling you, man, I was so broken down. I was so stressed out. I was at the end of my rope, man. And just sitting in my car, and I was just talking to God. I'm like, look, man, I need you to show me the path. I need you to show me the way here, because this ain't for me. I can't do this anymore. Like, I'm going to die. Like, I'm actually going to fucking die. Like, I'm so stressed out. I'm so exhausted.
Mm.
Like, I'm going to die. And I was just like, look, I just need you to illuminate the path. Show me the way. As long as you show me the way, I won't question it. I will just go. I won't question it. I won't try to control it. I won't try to manipulate anything about it. I will just go. I went to work. 15 minutes later, I got laid off. That same day, I had the first episode of this podcast.
Dude,
Yeah.
you got up, dressed up, and showed up. That's one of the things I say a lot. Just get up, dress up, and show up, and things will happen. So you got fired from your job. You didn't really know what you were going to do. You didn't even wait a day to get up and dress up and show up. You got up, dressed up, and showed up, and wrote an article.
But
or
no,
start
but here's the crazy part. I had the first guest for this episode booked on that day previously, but I was late for work because it was the first snow day of the year. And if I was late for work, that meant I was going to have to stay late. And if I had to stay late, I wouldn't have made it back here in time in order to do the podcast. So I got to ask God. I said, please just show me the way, show me what I need to be doing. I got to work. I got laid off. I made it home, and I launched the podcast. And now here you and I are talking to each
See,
other.
that's beautiful. I call that synchronicity. It's more than just a coincidence.
Yeah.
And I've checked many times, like, okay, God, if you want me to do this deal, open the doors. If you don't want me to do this deal, shut the doors.
Yeah.
And then the next day, something would fall apart. I'm like, that's one door shut. And then a week later, something else shuts. And about the third time, then I know that's God speaking to me. Don't do that. Or vice versa. The next day I'll get a call about this deal, and it'll build and go better. And then we bring on another team member that I wasn't expecting, and easy. And that's sort of how I've checked God's perfect will for me. Like, if I want this so bad, God, you have no idea how bad I want to do this. But if it's not in your perfect will, shut all the doors. And it sounds like you asked God the same thing. And I don't mean to be preaching or getting too spiritual, but this is important. Look what it did for you, bro.
Oh yeah.
Look what it's done for me.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And so, when you just to answer your question, like when I'm not shy about talking about my relationship with God. I'm not out there banging the fucking drum and dancing around in the streets, with a rosary around my neck, but if people ask, I'll talk about it. And I don't know if people look at me like I'm strange or like I'm crazy. I just feel bad for them because they're missing that connection. Their antenna's not up, and so,
yeah,
like that's it for me. I look at God as an omnipotent force it's both objective and subjective at the same time. We can observe it, but it's also inside of us. And I just view it as a signal that we're all capable of receiving, but only some of us are willing to receive it. And so when somebody says I'm crazy or looks at me weird, I just feel bad. I just feel like, man, you're not receiving that signal, and that sucks because it's, for me, now that I am where I am, it's just such a major part of my life, and it's worked wonders for me. It's done so much for me. So I don't,
congratulations, man.
Yeah, I mean, people can say whatever they want, but those of us who are experiencing life in the way that you and I are experiencing it, they know what we're talking about. And now that we're here, I don't think you or I would ever want to live without it,
No, and I think it says more for Christianity that at our age, we've already been successful people, and we decided to go back to God. Unlike, maybe an 18-year-old kid, he got in trouble for the first time, went to jail, and he found God in jail. And that's fine too. But 18-year-old kids are easy to trick. When you're at the bottom, it's easy to ask. I didn't go back to God when I was at the bottom. I didn't pray my way. Look, please save me and I'll come back to you. I was already doing good. I just had this, what you just explained.
Yeah, no. And that's it, man. I think it takes a certain amount of wisdom to realize and understand that there is something far greater out there and we're nothing without it.
And dude, that's what I want too. This could be, maybe out of selfishness, I'm going back to God to get wisdom. But God says seek wisdom in the Bible. He clearly tells you that. And we don't talk about wisdom anymore. And bro, with cancel culture and the woke ideology and the wars that are going on and the new world order, they're adjusting who's going to be boss. And we are really in a big radical change. And dude, I forgot again what I was saying. What was I saying?
We're experiencing a big radical change.
But
with everything that's going on in the world, and
right before
the power of God in all of that, and the power of God in our lives.
Shit, I don't remember it. Just you'd have had to edit that part out.
No, it's all good. We'll leave it in, my brother.
I get excited talking that my head gets over flooded and I start losing my way.
No, it's all good. You know what? You're getting your day started. My day's wrapping up. I actually got to wrap this up here in a second because I got a Filipino wife who's got to be up early, and she's gonna be pretty pissed if I don't let that happen very soon.
Yeah.
So, well, listen.
Bless her heart.
Barry, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you? And you know what? We'll wrap this up, and then when we're done recording, hang around and we'll say our goodbyes privately. But for now, tell everybody where they can find you.
Sure. The same place I've been for almost 20 years. Nevergetbusted.com. the same phone number, the same email address. If you ever want to find me, just nevergetbusted.com, or you can Google my name, Barry Cooper, and it'll point you to my website. If you want to hang out with me, I go live for 2 to 3 hours every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. And if you want to work with me, just join our NGB 400 activist group. And keep your Netflix dial tuned in, because that should be airing the first quarter of 2020. What year are we in right now?
2023. So 2024.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
2024. I look forward to seeing y'all there.